Season 1 of The Acolyte has been and gone, but there's no denying it made a big splash as it entered Star Wars canon.
You are not twins.
The show effectively laid the groundwork for what's to come in the prequel trilogy, however, it still left us wondering what's next. Whether you're just finding the channel now or you've rode the Acolyte train with us, here's our complete breakdown of The Acolyte Season 1, where you'll also be able to catch our theories with the beauty of hindsight.
Stop talking.
Before we jump in, don't forget to give the video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it and subscribe to the channel if you'd like to catch more of our Star Wars videos. So with all of that out of the way, let's deep dive on The Acolyte Season 1.
The Jedi live in a dream they believe everyone shares. If you attack a Jedi with a weapon, you will fail.
Okay, so we pick up episode 1 with an opening text, and to be honest, when a Star Wars Disney Plus show doesn't have some kind of text to set the scene, it just doesn't feel quite the same, does it? The version we get in The Acolyte is closer to what we saw in Solo: A Star Wars Story than what we used to see in the movies. Anyway, it sets the stage for The Acolyte, telling us it takes place before the Empire, 100 years before the Phantom Menace to be exact, so it falls into the category of the High Republic, which is said to be a time where the galaxy is largely at peace, although darkness is growing in the shadows. The episode picks up on a planet called Udea. May's walking into town looking for a Jedi Master called Indara. Thanks to a little help from one of the local children in exchange for some credits, she's pointed to the direction of a bar. Now, this is a theme that reoccurs over the 2 episodes, showing us that May has compassion for the poor, and I think we'll likely find out she sees herself in these kids as the season goes on. We do learn a little bit about May's tragic backstory, and it could all tie into that, which we'll get into in a moment. Now, May has unfinished business with this Master Indara. She walks into the bar and immediately confronts her, although her understanding of the Jedi immediately seems off when she demands Indara to attack her with all of her strength. Now, we know this simply isn't the Jedi way, and Indara refuses to do so. Now, I think May said this for a reason. In a galaxy where there's said to be around 10,000 Jedi in the Order at this time, she surely knows how they're going to act, and a lot of her actions seem to be fueled by a past event. So perhaps the Jedi have a few skeletons in their closet here. Now, this is where May begins to attack the locals sitting around her at the table for laughing at her request, but also as a way to goad Indara into attacking her. Now, what's interesting here is May doesn't actually kill any of these customers she's attacking, even though she's had plenty of opportunities to do so. Now, we see that May has some serious skills in combat, with Master Indara curious as to who's trained her. Now, being a Jedi Master, Indara overcomes May with relative ease and notices a distinct marking on her forehead, and it's at this moment Indara recognizes who she really is. Now, thanks to the trailers where we see a cult of witches led by Mother Anastasia, we can connect the dots. May's forehead marking is almost identical to that of the witches, meaning she originally hails from that Force cult. Now, whilst we don't know as of yet if the witches are still around at the time of the Acolyte, we do learn pretty early on in the show that something's happened in the past which led the Jedi to believe May, along with her mothers from the Coven, died some years ago. So May, noticing how attuned and conscious of her surrounds Indara was, and playing on the Jedi's need to save innocence, throws one of the knives at the barkeep, with Indara using the Force to save him from certain death. And it's in this moment that May pulls the cheap shot, throwing a knife into Indara's chest while she was distracted, which kills her. Now, May leaves the barkeep and his son alive, which to me is a bit sloppy. I would have thought she'd want no witnesses, unless she doesn't really care about being cool. Now, for the first trick of the show, we catch up with who the audience is initially meant to think is May, waking up on a ship with a droid called Pip beeping at her. However, thanks to a bit of a blunder by Lucasfilm, we actually learned from a TV spot some weeks ago that this character is actually called Osha, and we go on to learn in the show that this is actually May's twin sister, who actually joined the Jedi Order once and was the Padawan of Master Soul, who we're going to see in a moment. So she's got some pretty good relationships with the Jedi in the show. However, she did end up leaving the Jedi Order some years ago, which hopefully we'll find out why in a future episode. Now, Osha works as a mechanic, mentioning later in the episode that the skill set that comes with being a Jedi isn't easily transferable, and you know, I kind of disagree with that. The Jedi at this time seems to operate in a similar way to the police, so she could have gone and done that, or even work as a bounty hunter or something. But anyway, Osha's workmate asks her why she bowed on them in what sounded like a pretty wild night on Nar Shaddaa, which is a moon that orbits the homeworld of the Hutts called Nal Hutta. It turns out they're working on board of a Trade Federation ship, and we see the Neomodians here too, just like in the prequels. However, in the Acolyte they call it a Trade Fed, which I quite like. It's the in-universe way of saying it. All we need now is someone to call Emperor Palpatine Palps or Palpsy. Now, Osha is sent out to repair the ship, where she puts out a fire that somehow started in space with no oxygen, where she experiences a flashback from her past of a screaming and flames. Now, a Jedi Vector Starfire approaches carrying Yord Fanda, who is already one of my favourite characters of the show, and his Padawan. Yord kind of reminds me of like a Jedi version of Cyril Khan from Andor, goody two-shoes, playing by the book kind of guy, and there's nothing better than watching this type of character eventually break the rules. I don't know, it's just so satisfying. Now, the Jedi tell the Neomodians they're looking for a former Jedi by the name of Osha Anasea, which is the same last name as the mother we mentioned from the Coven of Witches a moment ago. She could be May and Osha's actual mother, or everyone on that coven goes by that last name. Anyway, Osha and Yord share a nice little reunion together, with Osha being genuinely proud of her old friend that he's gone on to become a Jedi Knight. However, the Jedi aren't there for a catch-up. Osha's been identified as the key suspect in Master Indara's murder. Yord's on edge, even reaching for his lightsaber at one point. Now, as the Jedi question Osha, we learn she joined the Order at 8 years old, and even though she was mourning the loss of her mothers and her sister, they still let her on board, and she ended up leaving the Jedi Order 6 years ago. She's taken to the prison transport with the coordinates set for Coruscant, where she'll remain in custody until her trial. The Jedi are pretty sure it's her given a description, and it doesn't help her case that the barkeep springs out of nowhere and identifies her. Now, on Coruscant, we see Master Soul, portrayed by Lee Jang-jae, who's put in a masterful performance in his first 2 episodes so far, I have to say. Master Soul's really been a standout character for me. So Soul's training a group of younglings in the ways of the Force, asking how it appears in their minds, but that's when Jedi Master Finesta Rao walks in, who fans that have read the High Republic books will recognise as she was in them too. Although the events of them books were set even further back than The Acolyte, another 100 years, with Finesta now being 116 years old in this show. Now, Soul's already aware of Indara's murder, but Finesta informs him that Osha, his former Padawan, has been identified as the assailant. Soul immediately doesn't believe that to be the case. After all, it was Soul and Indara that saved May from the fire that took everything from her and took her in. Finesta picks up on Soul's attachment to his former Padawan, which is unusual for an accomplished Jedi such as Soul, but is central to his character in this show. If I had to compare a Jedi that we know from the Skywalker saga with Soul, I'd say he gives me early vibes of being the Qui-Gon Jinn of this era. Now, the Order want justice for Indara, and they want it quickly and discreetly, as to not alert any of their rivals of a potential problem within the Order that a former Jedi killing a master would create. Now, on the way to Coruscant, Osha meets the other criminals. One of them is suffering from a diebuck, which is a parasite that's being used to subdue him. The prisoners are planning to escape, not trusting their fate to the Jedi Order or the Republic. However, Osha, even after leaving the Jedi, still trusts them. So I'm wondering, why is it she left the Jedi in the first place then? Now, the ship's going down as the other inmates escape. Osha uses Pip to unlock her cell. She's about to take the last escape pod. However, she decides not to leave our diebuck friend to die, removing the parasite from his face, only for him to wake up and take the last escape pod for himself. He probably would have done the galaxy a favour by leaving the parasite on him. Anyway, the ship crashes on a planet called Karlach, which is a snowy planet in the Outer Rim. Now, it isn't a new planet to Star Wars, as it is in the Clone Wars. Death Watch burned down a town to the ground there. Osha goes on to have a force vision of her sister May, where they both appear as children in it. They're back on their homeworld of Brendok, forests covered in flames, and this is probably the night of the tragedy. Soul, alongside his Padawan Jeki, on her first mission, and our guy Yord, race to Karlach after becoming aware of the transport ship going down there. Republic probe droids were sent to scout for life, but found nothing. However, Soul can feel through the Force that his former Padawan's still alive. Jeki asks Soul how well does he know his former Padawan, and it's here that we learn that the Jedi, Osha as well, believe May was the one that started the fire, killing her family. However, I wouldn't be surprised to learn that May believes it's a Jedi that started the fire. Now, the truth of it all could be that actually it was a Sith that started the fire, knowing May would believe it's the Jedi, grooming her to one day take up the role as a Sith apprentice, similar to how Palpatine turned Anakin to the dark side. However, it would be a pretty big twist if we learned that the Jedi are actually the ones to blame, and there's certainly more clues in episode 2, I will say, that support that. Perhaps the Jedi started the fire, justifying it as necessary to remove a greater evil that is Mother Anasea's Coven of Witches. Now, back on the snowy planet, and Osha becomes aware of an approaching ship. She runs into a cave with the Jedi following closely behind. She pleads with the Jedi to believe that she didn't do it, before stumbling off the edge of the cliff, only to be force pulled back up by Master Soul, where it's then revealed that he believes her even if no one else does. Now we pick back up with May. She's landed on the unidentified island that we see in the trailers. that a lot of fans thought could be Hux too. And I have to say, although I initially thought that, seeing it again in this episode, I don't really think it is. But we hear the voice of the mysterious masked villain holding a red lightsaber talking to May, telling her that the Jedi live in a dream and that they think everyone else also lives in that dream, but an acolyte kills the dream. He also mentions here that an acolyte doesn't kill with a weapon, and we'll dive into that a bit more with episode 2. So in the second episode, it kicks off on the planet of Alega, where May's trying to gain access into the local Jedi temple there. And again, she pays a local child to activate the droid at the door, so she can bypass the system without any cameras catching her. Now inside the temple, we find another Jedi Master, although this one's in a meditative state. This is called a Barish Vow, and essentially it's an oath taken by Jedi which refrains them from all activities related to the Order, disengaging from everything other than the Force itself. Now this Jedi Master is called Torbin, and there's a force field surrounding him which May can't penetrate. Interestingly though, she tries the same approach with him as she did with Indara by telling him to attack her first. For some reason, she seems adamant that this is what the Jedi do. It'll be interesting to see if they did do something like this in her past. Now May leaves for now, realising trying to break through the Force shield is pointless. She needs to find a different method. The Jedi at the temple become aware that there was an intruder in with Torbin, and given the recent attack on Indara, they go to investigate. Things are starting to play into Osha's favour now, as this break-in happened while she's in Jedi custody, which points to the possibility that it may not be Osha after all. Now May visits one of the most interesting characters so far in Qimir. Now I thought for a while that he's actually the figure under the mask, however his brief appearance in episode 2 has both made me doubt that theory and double down on it. Qimir has taken over a local shop on a planet literally across the road from the Jedi Temple, funnily enough, so I'm thinking, has he relocated here to help May on her mission to kill the Jedi, or has he done it to watch her? So May goes to him asking to make a potion that was native to her homeworld using Bunta. May reveals that she has 2 more Jedi to kill after Torbin, which we go on to learn are Wookiee Jedi Kelnaka and Master Soul himself. Together with Indara and Torbin, they are all stationed on May's homeworld at the time of the tragedy. We also learn here that May needs to kill at least one of these Jedi without a weapon to please the Master. Interestingly, Qimir seems to know a fair bit about this as well. There's certainly more to this character than meets the eye. Osha and Soul talk about May's survival. Soul's made peace with what happened that night she supposedly died, knowing he did all he could to help and that he wasn't at fault for what happened, whereas Osha still carried it with her, despite one of Soul's last lessons to her being about trying to move on from it. This could be why she decided to leave the Order, as she couldn't commit to it fully. Now, May pays Torbin another visit. This time her goal is to get him to lower down the Force shield himself. I think the reason Torbin took the Barish Vow was because of what happened on May's homeworld all those years ago. She gives him an ultimatum, and it seems Torbin's been waiting for her to come to him. He's either to confess his crimes to the Jedi Council or drink the poison. Now, there's a good chance if Torbin was stationed on May's homeworld that he'd know a bit about the place, perhaps even the local poison used there for hunting, and there's a chance he recognised it here. Torbin opens his eyes, and for the first time in 10 years he speaks, asking her for forgiveness and that they thought they were doing the right thing. So yeah, this to me sounds like the Jedi did some pretty messed up shiz on May's planet, leading to his destruction and the death of the Coven, with May also believing Osha died that night too. Now Torbin, effectively if true, decides to take the coward's way out by drinking the potion, effectively committing suicide rather than confessing his mistakes to the Council. Now at this point, the Jedi are already inside the temple and on their way to find Torbin. Due to their long friendship, Soul believes he'll speak to him even though he hasn't spoken a word in many years. Now Osha has another one of these visions, seeing a younger May once again, which leads her directly to Torbin's room, where she finds the Jedi Master laying dead on the floor, and it's right at this moment that the rest of the Jedi walk in the room as well. Now one of the local Jedi stationed at the temple ignites their lightsaber at this point, as Osha does look pretty guilty here. However, Yord comes in to save the day, as he followed Osha once she split from the group, leading him to be able to confirm the Master was already dead when Osha found him. Osha notices the poison used was one of the local ones used on our homeworld of Brendok, and that it must have been made locally as the effects of it wear off pretty quickly, which rules it out of going through any kind of space travel. Now this also pretty much confirms that her sister May is alive and she's behind the attacks as well. This leads them to identifying Qimir's newly acquired shop as a place of interest, noting how he's a new face there in the crowd. Now the plan is for Osha to go undercover as she looks like her twin sister, speak to Qimir and try and record any kind of confession he lets slip, believing it's May. It's a risky move, but it certainly pays off, with Qimir mentioning about the poison, Torbin, and even at one point believing May killed him without using the poison, which would certainly please the Master. And it's at this point that the Jedi have heard enough and decide to enter the shop. Now, they ask Qimir a series of questions, and knowing he's been well and truly caught out here, to my surprise he completely rats May out, even telling the Jedi that she has 4 targets, although he still sticks to the idea that he's just her supplier effectively, which I don't buy for one moment. He tells the Jedi that May will be back later as he's got some things kept for her there. Actually, come to think of it, Qimir's probably only pretended to help the Jedi to throw him off his own scent. Now Osha wants to be the one to confront May, blaming her for what happened to her sister, and just imagine a twist if it turns out that it actually was the Jedi's fault after all. How would Osha deal with that? Would it ultimately drive her to the dark side to join May? Dol's against the idea, telling Osha he couldn't save May before, but perhaps he can now, and that Osha's resentment for her sister places her on a slippery slope, one where she could easily fall down the path May has. Now May eventually does show up, as Qimir said, only to be confronted by Master Sol. They fight, and Sol doesn't ignite his lightsaber as Master Indara did. Instead he only fights using his hands. It's fair to say May isn't a match for Master Sol in fair combat either, with him disarming her with ease. He's also trying to gain information out of her. Yes, she's got her own reasons for targeting 4 particular Jedi, but there's someone or something else encouraging it from the shadows. As it turns out, May doesn't actually know who her master is, even if she wanted to tell Sol she couldn't. Now bearing in mind we see May meet who everyone thought was the Sith Lord at the end of episode 1, this tells me that this wasn't actually the master but more likely the apprentice. At this point in the timeline, the Master could actually be Darth Tenebrous, keeping his existence so secret that even those that are serving under him aren't exactly sure on who he is. Now, whilst May is well trained, she is not at the level of a Jedi Master, which is expected. She's not exactly a Sith Lord herself, which would be a match. However, she's got brains, and she uses them again here when she's cornered by the Jedi with a clever use of the Force as she force pushes the ground, causing a bloom of dirt to rise up, and she disappears just like a magic trick. Now, as she steals a speeder bike to escape from one of the local aliens going about his day, she comes face to face with Osha, who purposely misses the opportunity to stun her, allowing her to escape. Now, May eventually circles back to Qimir's shop to confront him on betraying her, sneaking up on him from behind, but if you notice here, interestingly, May always acts like Qimir works for her. However, he's blocked and dodged her attacks with ease, just as a fully trained Jedi Master would, and even pins her up against the wall. You don't reach that level of skill being a smuggler or a trader typically. Now, we already know that May's next target is going to be Jedi Master Wookiee Kelnucka, and the end of the episode leads us into just that as we pick up with the Wookiee Jedi on the planet of Kofar. 2 scavengers are attempting to strip his ship before he easily disarms them with the Force and they run off. The episode opens with a voyage into history, delving 16 years into the past before the central timeline of the story. We're transported to Brendok, the homeworld of May and Osha, where the mystery of their tragedy begins to unfold, potentially shedding light on the Jedi's involvement. Now, as the episode unfolds, we're treated to a flyover across the planet, where an unusual formation catches my eye, a circle of monoliths crowning one of the verdant peaks. Now, known as a Force Henge, this structure bears a striking resemblance to the one discovered by Mando and Grogu on Typhon in The Mandalorian Season 2, and it's also very similar to the Force Henge encountered by Baylan, Shin and Morgan on Satos in the Ahsoka show. Now, in the heart of the forest, May and Osha are immersed in play. Osha, seated under the canopy of a bunta tree, engages with some kind of weird butterfly-like creature using the Force. Instantly, it's evident that Osha's spirit is misaligned with her community. Her destiny seems more intertwined with the path of the Jedi, drawn to solitude and the embrace of nature. The previous episode revealed the bunta tree's dark secret, which is essentially a lethal toxin employed by the locals for hunting, with it also being the very poison that claimed Torbin's life. While Osha's interaction with the creature is benign, May intervenes with a more aggressive use of her powers, prompting Osha to shout at her to stop. This scene's also crafted to contrast Osha's virtuous nature with May's seemingly malevolent disposition, yet we're also given subtle indications that Osha too harbours a touch of darkness within her. Currently, I feel like the narrative is filtered through Osha's perspective here, but future episodes will hopefully reveal May's and the Jedi's viewpoints on these events as well. The episode intentionally leaves us with unanswered questions. I feel there's more to discover about the fire and the demise of the Coven, but it does a good job at highlighting the differences between May and Osha. This tension explains Osha's decision to not join May at the end of the last episode. Now, Osha resists participating in something called the Ascension. It's essentially a rite that would forever bind her into witchhood, whereas May is more than ready to embrace the commitment. Their mother Coral, as Zabrak, just like Darth Maul, finds them and warns them of the dangers lurking outside the compound. Now, her fear is palpable, likely rooted in the knowledge that the Jedi's presence on the planet forced the Covenant into seclusion beyond the Republic's reach in the first place. Now, the Republic harbours a deep-seated fear of the Witch's dark powers, yet remains ignorant of the Covenant's true teachings, a doctrine deeply reverent of the Force and its connection to nature and kinship. Now, as the sisters prepare to return inside, we also catch a glimpse of Master Soul lurking in the shadows of the trees. And it's here that we're formally introduced to Mother Anastasia, who appears to be both the biological mother and the esteemed leader of May and Osha. Her dual role as a parent and matriarch is a source of conflict, particularly when she and Coral clash over the daughter's punishment for venturing into the woods. A soft approach that seems at odds with the impending ascension ceremony, of course being a rite symbolising their passage to maturity and growth. Now, Anastasia imparts wisdom about something called the Thread, and essentially it is the Force, an ethereal bond uniting all life. While some refer to it as the Force and claim mastery over it, Anastasia teaches that the thread is not a tool to be wielded, but a sacred connection to one's fate and to others. Her feminine interpretation of the Force suggests a gentle yet transformative power, one that Osha seems to invoke through her inquisitive pull towards the Jedi, intertwining her destiny with theirs. However, the lesson is pretty much lost on the sisters as they bicker. Anastasia exerts her influence, met with resistance by May, who displays a formidable strength surpassing her twin. Now, Osha reveals she's not totally sure on the whole ceremony to her mother. The Ascension, a journey through fear and self-sacrifice, looms over them, and Anastasia warns Osha that the galaxy shuns woman with their abilities. However, Osha's thoughts go to a life beyond the confines of Brendok. Now, at the ceremony, we see May pledge her allegiance to safeguard the Coven's secrets and uphold its heritage, receiving the Coven's emblem marked on her forehead as a testament to her vow. It's also worth noting that the two moons in alignment during the rite may well amplify the witch's connection to the Force. Now, this convergence, along with the collective might of the witches, resonates with their song, the strength of one, the strength of two, the strength of many, effectively a single world, dual moons, and a multitude of witches. This trinity perhaps explains the prevalence of triangular motives within the Coven's culture. So Osha, though tentative, agrees to the ceremony. However, before the ritual can be completed, the Jedi make an unanticipated entrance, having sliced the platform. Now, that's a term in the Star Wars universe synonymous with hacking or just simply breaching a system. Now, Anastasia commands the witches to stand down, advocating for peace in the face of confrontation. These Jedi are the very ones May seeks vengeance upon in the present, and we can even see here that Torbin's still got his Padawan braid. Now, the Jedi's intentions on the surface appear non-threatening, with them simply asserting their presence under Republic mandate, prohibiting the training of children by the witches. Anastasia, on the other hand, counters with Brendok's sovereignty independent of Republic jurisdiction. Now, for me, this encounter epitomizes the Jedi Order's hubris and rigid doctrines, which sowed the seeds of their eventual demise by fueling animosity towards their galactic supremacy. Despite the portrayal of the witches as benign Force practitioners desiring isolation, the episode hints at darker undertones, particularly in Anastasia's actions towards Torbin. Soul clarifies that the Jedi do not abduct children, which is true, as usually parents actually offer their Force-sensitive kids for Jedi training, kind of like a public service. Anyway, the Jedi assert their right to assess potential Padawans, to which Anastasia begrudgingly agrees. So in the wake of the Jedi's intrusion, the witches convene to ponder their next move. Coral poses a dire question to Anastasia: what fate would befall their coven if the Jedi, with their aversion to the dark side, discovered the unnatural origins of May and Osha? The implication is pretty clear. The Jedi might annihilate them, fearing the potential magnitude of their power across the galaxy. This episode unveils a startling revelation. Mother Anastasia harnessed the dark side of the Force to conceive her offspring with Mother Coral. The birth of May and Osha actually mirrors the mysterious arrival of Anakin Skywalker, who was also born through the Force with no father. While Anakin's conception is believed to be the Force's counter to Darth Plagueis' meddling with midichlorians to create life, the witch's lore may hold the key to this arcane knowledge. The Coven's ties to the Sith, possibly to Plagueis or his master Tenebrous themselves, suggests that such secrets were perhaps shared, laying the groundwork for the Sith's understanding of life creation via the Force during the era of the Acolyte. Now, one of the Coven's elders advises the twins to simply deceive during their Jedi evaluation in order to avoid being taken. And composer Michael Abel's score here takes a captivating turn as Osha lays eyes on the Jedi's ship for the first time, the music swelling into a whimsical melody reminiscent of the iconic Star Wars compositions, signalling her glimpse into a broader universe with the Jedi. Now, this shift in tone reflects our journey through Osha's eyes, as I mentioned, for whom the Jedi are not merely knights, but the key to an expansive cosmos. The episode nods to familiar rituals as Torbin conducts a blood analysis, akin to Qui-Gon's midichlorian count of Anakin. Osha's curiosity about lightsabers is also met with Torbin's assurance that they come with extensive training. Now, the testing sequence reveals May's initial deceit, quickly perceived by the Jedi. Zoe and Endara witness Osha's true strength as she feigns unawareness of the Lothcat displayed out of her view. Now, one might speculate that this very blood test prompted the Jedi's covert entry into the Witch's domain that fateful night, perhaps seeking the secret of their potent creation. It wouldn't surprise me if the M-count test came back so high that the Jedi returned to find out more. Now, Mother Anastaea's acceptance of her daughter's potential path with the Jedi does seem progressive on the surface, yet future reveals may expose a darker consequence, possibly leading May to be manipulated into a harrowing act, whilst Osha's departure preparations also echo Anakin's own journey in The Phantom Menace as she packs her belongings with a sense of destiny. Her sketchbook reveals a symbol strikingly similar to that of the Jedi Order, and it probably is, yet the book's triangular form hints at the Coven's clandestine Sith affiliations. The episode's motif of duality persists as May goes on to ignite a fire, torch bearing twin flames. Now that's a symbolic echo of the sisters' intertwined fates. Now amidst the blaze, Osha flees, her Coven's cries haunting in the air, and she eventually reunites with May on a fractured bridge, a visual metaphor for their severed bond. Now I don't believe for a minute the little notebook fire that May started is what caused these big explosions. And I do think there's deeper secrets to be unearthed, hopefully in a later episode. Now, as May apparently dies, Sol emerges as Osha's saviour, vowing to shield her from any future sorrow as well. A promise fraught with uncertainty, to be honest. Now, Osha's escape is marred by the sight of her fallen coven, including Anastaea, which likely makes her handling of what she's lost all the worse. Now, the Acolyte teases a revelation akin to Anakin's Force-conceived birth in this episode, a secret known to the witches but probably lost to the grave, yet whispers of this power may have just reached Sith ears, with either Plagueis or Tenebrous potentially gleaning this knowledge during the time of the Acolyte. Okay, so we pick up almost where we left off in episode 2. Qimir learns the whereabouts of the Wookiee Jedi Kel Nuka, which is in the luxury forest retreat on a planet called Kofar. There, Kel Nuka's living out a solitary life away from the Jedi and the Republic. Now, we do learn that he turned off his transponder around a year ago, and since then he hasn't likely had any contact with anyone within the Order. He's living on his ship, which has definitely seen better days, but interestingly, he's drawn the symbols of the witches of Brendok on his wall. Now, this could mean a multitude of different things. However, I think the witch symbols are most likely there to show us that the events of Brendok have had a deep, lasting impact on Kel Nuka, likely in a similar fashion to how they did for Torbin, and this has led Kel Nuka to effectively cutting himself off. So they're really there to show us that not all's well with the Wookiee and that his past is still haunting him. Now, back on Coruscant, it's almost leaving time for Osha. With the help of Sol and the other Jedi, her name's pretty much being cleared at this point, and she can't really bring herself to be a part of the mission to capture May, so she really serves no further purpose being there. May's very much the Jedi's problem now, or so Osha thinks. She watches as the other Padawans, including Jeki, train under Master Lakshay, and I can't help but feel like she's wondering what her life would have been like if she did end up sticking it out with the Jedi. After saying her goodbyes to Jeki, she's leaving without saying goodbye to Master Sol, feeling she's caused him enough trouble already. Now, without dwelling on the past for too long, we cut back to Kofar, where May and Qimir finally arrive. Now, what's interesting is that we see both of them have a clothing pod each, but there's also a third clothing pod too. Now, I'm of the belief here that Qimir is actually the Master Red lightsaber wielding villain, who does also feature in this episode, by the way, if you haven't seen it. But seeing 3 clothing pods here when there should really only be 2 makes me wonder if the helmet and the Sith gear are actually stashed away inside. Either that, or one of them just wants to enjoy the forest retreat for a while after they've dealt with the Wookiee. Now, Qimir tells May that he's risking his life to help her, not for the Master. There's also mention of a deal in place between May and the Master as well. Now, if I were to guess, I'd say that the Master's agreed to train May as an acolyte, providing her with the skill set that she needs to take down and kill Jedi. However, that also comes with the understanding that she has to do so without the use of a weapon. Now, interestingly, this episode hints at the possibility that May actually knows the Master through Qimir, not the other way around. That he was potentially Qimir's master before May's. Although May clearly has limited knowledge of the true situation at hand here, that's her viewpoint of it all, for now at least. Now, the Jedi are holding a small meeting to discuss the reveal that Osha's long-lost, presumed dead twin sister, May Anastasia, is the one going around killing Jedi rather than Osha herself. Now, this presents a vastly different situation to the Jedi than if it was just Osha responsible, as May's an outsider with training, which means whoever her master is has knowledge of the dark side of the Force and isn't a fan of the Jedi themselves, whereas before, if it was Osha, they knew where she got all her training from. Now, as the Jedi discuss what steps to take in dealing with May, we see the Jedi present in the meeting are Holden, Lakshay, and a face you'll be familiar with, Ki-Adi-Mundi. Now, he's the very Jedi that told the rest of the Council in The Phantom Menace that the Sith have been extinct for more than a millennia. Now, this ultimately means either the Jedi never get to the bottom of who May's master really is, or Ki-Adi-Mundi is involved in probably the biggest cover-up in the history of the Jedi Order. Now, at this point, I think both scenarios hold the potential to be true, as we've already seen the Jedi's reluctance to pass information on in fear of the reaction from other council members or even the wider Republic. The Jedi note here that May has incredible fighting skills, and Vanesta's mind instantly goes to a Jedi teacher, possibly a Splinter Order, which is effectively a rogue Jedi that's turned to the dark side. This further shows their ignorance to other powerful Force users being out there in the galaxy at this time, such as the Sith. Vanesta's reluctant to tell the High Council about May, and instead wants to send Holden to get Kelnucka and take May out. However, with Sol's attachment to Osha and the fact he couldn't save May before, but hopes to now getting the better of him, he volunteers to go himself, taking Osha along too. Now, we see the Jedi here thinking out the situation a few steps ahead, as they understand by outright arresting May, whoever her master likely is would then retreat back into the shadows and possibly be lost to the Jedi forever. That's why they decide to take Osha along, as she's the one who could potentially lead May to handing herself in. Rao tells Sol she feels May's only a small part of a grander plan to ultimately tip the scales into darkness, which, as we know, is exactly what's happening. Now, one thing this episode does really well is it paves out Qimir and May's different relationships with the enigmatic Master. As mentioned earlier, it seems Qimir introduced May to the Master himself. However, we learn that unlike May, Qimir hasn't made some kind of deal with him. Rather, the Master's just collected him and is creating a network of beings he deems useful to his cause. You know, I really do think Qimir is the Master himself here, and this is all just part of his disguise. With the Sith keeping their existence and identities tightly under wraps, I think Qimir is doing all of this in case May was ever to be compromised. He seems to be adding fuel to the fire at almost every given opportunity. He's always reminding May of her mission, and although he seems to care for her, he also knows which buttons to push and when. As seen when May shows a level of compassion for her sister, however she's ultimately disgusted that she's become a Jedi. That's when Qimir subtly drops in which Jedi she seems most attached to, almost pointing her in the direction of what Jedi needs to be killed to free her sister from their grasp. Now, as Osha is about to board the transport and leave Coruscant, Sol finds her and convinces her to come along on the mission with him, telling Osha that there's still light within May when it comes to her sister, and that her eyes softened when she learned Osha was alive. Osha asks if she'll be on the mission as a Jedi, and while Sol doesn't dismiss the possibility of her coming back entirely, you know, I'm sure he'd love to have her back, she's still going to be going on this mission as a civilian, which means she's also got to wear the civilian robe. Now, I have to say, I found that pretty funny. I often find Star Wars works best when it's not trying to be funny, as when it does, it can often be too on the nose and feel a little bit forced, which mostly happened in the sequels, if I'm being honest. But here, I think they actually hit the sweet spot with the humour. And I also think the more time Osha spends around a Jedi, the more she wants to come back on board. Anyway, in order for the Jedi to find Kelnucka in the forest, they need a tracker, and as Kelnucka turned off communication a year ago, they're using an alien called Basil. Now, Basil's actually another character that's come over to canon from Legends, pretty much fulfilling the role of a sniffer dog. Basil smells an old rag, which probably belonged to Kelnucka at one point, and then sets about picking up his scent in the forest. Now, on the way to find Kelnucka, it becomes even more evident. The twins' feelings for one another, despite all them years of separation and being on completely different paths, is still strong. And like we've already seen with Osha leaving the Jedi Order as she wasn't able to shake the past, we'll also see it's these very feelings that seem to be leading May down a similar path with the Sith. Now Osha tells Yord that if things go south, he needs to step up for her and take out May, but Yord tells her she needs to face May, but also herself and her past. May's been the one wound Osha's had over the years that's never quite healed. Now it wouldn't quite be Star Wars, would it, without the strange looking monster creatures. The Bad Batch is well known for it, but in truth it's always been a big part of Star Wars, from A New Hope when we had the Wampa to the Mandalorian, with creatures such as the Krayt Dragon, just to name a few. This time around though, it's the moth-like creatures called Umbra Moth. They stick to trees, and upon walking past, Osha detects its presence, which is actually a sign of her Force abilities slowly coming back to her after years of not using them. However, the moth also senses her and decides to attack. Luckily though, it turns out that just like moths on Earth, these are also attracted to light too, with them being drawn towards Soul's lightsaber where he slices it in half. I mean, it kind of makes sense in a way, doesn't it? Now, I'm not too big on the story being slowed down for a battle with strange creatures in general, so I kind of liked how quickly this was resolved. So May and Qimir take a short break from tracking down Kel Nuka. Qimir seems to have stamina for days, whereas May's pretty knackered at this point in time, and if she's about to take on a Wookiee Jedi, she wants a bit of rest beforehand. We learn that killing a Jedi without a weapon is what the Master calls May's final lesson. Now essentially, through May, we're seeing a version of the Sith's training as opposed to the Jedi's for a change. Now, May thinks this is near on impossible, but if she doesn't do it, the Master's going to kill her. Of course, Qimir is here telling her that it is possible. Now, I actually agree with May here. I don't think it's possible for her to kill a Jedi without a weapon just by using the Force and cunning alone, and I actually think she's misunderstood the real meaning behind her final lesson as well. I think the Master wants her to kill the idea of the Jedi rather than killing them physically. The Master wants her to manipulate the perception of a Jedi those around them. So for example, how she could kill Kel Nuka without a weapon would be for her to lead the rest of the Jedi Order into believing he's actually not a good Jedi after all, perhaps due to his actions on Brendok, for example, with the Jedi in turn then removing him from the Order and perhaps even worse, imprisoning him. As the Master said in episode 1, an acolyte kills the dream, as in kills the dream of the Jedi. Accepting to take a break, Qimir goes on ahead to look for water. Now, I don't think this is really what he's doing, but May's got other ideas anyway. She lets out a series of screams to lure him back, only for him to be caught up in a quick trap that she's made up. She tells Qimir Osha being alive changes absolutely everything, and that her loyalty now lies with her sister and not his master. Now this is a huge twist, I really didn't see this coming. Anyway, she plans on surrendering to Kel Nuka and telling the Jedi everything she knows in regards to her master, Qimir, and the Sith, if she actually knows they're Sith, that is. Now, just as we thought we could trust Soul as well, this is an episode full of surprises and twists, and that if the Jedi did actually do something wrong on Brendok all them years ago, then Soul likely didn't know about it. We get hit with a bombshell that Soul hasn't been entirely truthful thus far, with him telling Osha that once they manage to get May on the ship, he'll explain everything to them, implying that there's another side of the story yet to be told. So May, making a mad dash away from Qimir being trapped, locates Kel Nuka's ship, coming across Basil in the process, who then sends out a call to the rest of the Jedi that he's found her. But once inside the ship, we're hit with another big bombshell that Kel Nuka's already dead by a lightsaber wound as well. Now, May comes to the daunting realization here that her master's there too. With Kel Nuka's wounds still smouldering, the attack likely only just happened. Now, it's totally possible that Qimir did go looking for water, but then again, it's totally possible that he actually went on ahead and dealt with Kel Nuka himself, trying to push May along when she needed it the most, when he sensed the darkness was dwindling within her, which would only leave her one Jedi left to kill without a weapon, and that would be Soul. And if it is indeed supposed to mean killing a dream of Soul rather than actually killing him physically, then the implications of that could result in Osha falling to the dark side too. Then the Sith would then have two acolytes in their service until only the strongest one remains. So the Jedi arrive before too long to Basil's calls and tell May to come out. However, as the Jedi told Osha to stay behind them, as she is after all the civilian on the mission, a dark figure descends down behind her, and this moment really gives you classic horror movie vibes, which I think fits the Sith really well. It turns out to be the masked villain we've all been waiting for, May's master. Jackie and the other Jedi have no idea what it is, but then it ignites its red lightsaber. The Jedi ignite theirs, and Soul shouts at Osha to run. The Sith then throws May to the side with no effort at all, and he also pushes the other Jedi back effortlessly using the Force. So whoever this Sith turns out to be, Qimir or someone else, they're clearly extremely powerful, and going by what we've seen of them so far, that'd be more of a match for most of, if not all of the Jedi present in that forest. Okay, so we pick up right where we left off in episode 4 with Osha waking up from being thrown by the Master on Kofar, not far from Kelnucker's home. She finds Pip nearby and heads towards the distant sound of clashing lightsabers, falling over the body of a Jedi on the way, which shows us immediately that the Master's not there to mess around and that, like Osha, we've missed some of the action. The Jedi are engaged in an intense battle with the Master in what turns out to be a Jedi bloodbath of an episode. Yord does step into play his part but is quickly injured. The mysterious masked menace has excellent use of the Force and is very proficient with a lightsaber. He's pretty much already killed most of the Jedi on Kofar, apart from your main ones that we've seen throughout the show. However, that's all about to change. You'll notice here why the Jedi's lightsaber keeps short-circuiting. That's because the Master's headbutting him using his helmet. So I think the helmet's actually made out of cortosis, which is a metal that's able to withstand lightsaber strikes for a time, whilst also being able to short-circuit them as well. Now, interestingly, this could also tell us more about the Master and the Sith of this time too. In Legends, Darth Tenebrous, who would likely be the big Sith Lord during the time of the Acolyte, was known to mine cortosis himself, and that's something that wasn't actually continued by his apprentice Darth Plagueis. So if May's master is actually a Sith apprentice to Darth Tenebrous, that would explain why his helmet's made out of cortosis. And let's just be real here for a moment. Hasn't this Sith literally got himself all of the in-app purchases with these accessories? As the Master's attentions turn to Yord, Osha uses her blaster to stun him, however it has no effect. Cortosis doesn't just short-circuit lightsabers, it's able to absorb energy. In Legends, they use it on some of the ships and battle droids as well. Now, although Osha's attack didn't harm the Master in any way, it did succeed in turning his attentions away from Yord and onto the twin, which I think is a little bit odd. Why was he so interested in capturing Osha that he left Yord alive when he could have killed him there and then? Now, up until now, May's still been inside Kelnucker's place watching everything unfold from the window. The Master chases Osha and May, deciding enough is enough, picks up Kelnucker's lightsaber that's on the ground with the intention, I think, to save Osha. Now, the Master almost beheads her, but Sol saves her life again. So now we've got Sol, Osha and Yord facing off against the Master, but Sol doesn't want her in this fight, force pushing her back towards Yord, who he directs to take the civilian back to the ship, which as a Jedi Master, that would be the right call. Yeah, Osha was a Jedi once, but she hasn't trained in years and her abilities are only slowly starting to return. Now, we see the mysterious Master taunt Sol, giving off the impression that he knows him, and Sol admits that he can sense something familiar, not being able to put his finger exactly on what though. Now, of course, this could be the identity of the character behind the mask, but it could also be the presence of the Sith in general back on Brendok, as I really do believe they were there back then as well, possibly learning new dark side abilities from the Coven, which would then go on to influence Plagueis to attempt to create life by manipulating the midichlorians one day. Now, back with May, and she's rushing out of Kelnucker's. However, Jackie spots her and confronts her, attempting an arrest. She almost pulls it off too, however May just about manages to escape. They both fight, and it's pretty telling where May is in terms of her fighting ability. Jackie's still a Padawan and is putting up one hell of a fight. The real power of the dark side in this show certainly sits with the Master. The Sol demands the Master reveal his face, to which the Master replied by saying,
"And let you read my thoughts."
Now, where have we heard that before? So Sol continues to jab at the Master, asking him what kind of Master hides his face from his pupil, where the Sith responds with, "You tell me," which implies that although Sol doesn't wear a physical mask, he's still very much wearing one, hiding his true self, his darker self. So as Osha and Yord are making their way back to the ship, Osha asks him what is that thing they've encountered, to which Yord has no idea. He doesn't follow the rules of combat, whilst he also has the ability to get into your head and stay there. Now, interestingly, Osha responds by reminding us that her mother had the ability to do that as well. Now, I've never been subscribed to the idea of the Master being one of the mothers, but I do believe the Sith picked up some dark powers from the witches on Brendok, and this wouldn't be the first time the Sith have looked at other dark side force groups for knowledge. Palpatine's also known to have looked at the Night Sisters for knowledge too. Now, as Jackie finally manages to get May into handcuffs, the Master attacks and tells May that she can learn something from this Padawan. She's a loyal pupil, unlike May. So Jackie and the Master fight, where we see the cortosis cause her lightsaber to short circuit for a moment again. So she draws for Kelnucker's lightsaber that's nearby on the ground, and then her own once it comes back around to fight with both. And she really does smash it with great form. However, in the midst of all the action, May senses an opportunity to escape, running off into the forest. So the Master chooses to pursue her rather than kill Jackie there and then, Similar situation to what we just saw a moment ago, where he left Yord to chase Osha. Now, I think he really wants both twins here, but there's also an element of May betraying him as well, and the knowledge that she possesses is probably more damning to the Sith if it got out and in the hands of the Jedi than the testimony of a few Jedi that encountered someone in the forest. Now, interestingly, whilst he's pursuing May, he's also actually trying to kill her, calling her a coward for betraying him, telling her she's always been weak, which is something we've come to see more and more as the season progresses. May's pleading for forgiveness from the Master, and while it looks like she has it momentarily, when he cuts her free of the handcuffs, he quickly attempts to kill her again, but Sol manages to drag him back before he's able to. Then Sol and Jecki engage him one more time. Now, walking through the forest back to the ship, around the area where the Umbra Moth creatures are, Osha hears a young May voice in her head again. Like the vision we had in episode 1, she realises they need to go back, believing everyone will die if they don't, and Yord hesitantly agrees. Now, because these creatures are drawn to light, she uses her torch to attract them, hoping they'll follow her back to the fight and break it up and potentially attack the Master. Now, Jecki manages to cut off the Master's helmet, however, before we get to see his face, he pulls his lightsaber into two, revealing two red blades. He's used one to block Jecki's attack and the other one to stab her 3 times through the chest, killing her instantly, and then we get the big reveal that the Master is actually Qimir. And I've been saying this in videos for a while, but I actually first predicted it way back before the first episode premiered. I just wanted to put that out there. So Sol calls out to her as she falls to the floor, before Qimir point scores a little here by saying,
Was that its name?
and I think he said this because Jecki dehumanized him earlier by saying,
What is that?
Sol says she was the child, to which Qimir coldly responds by saying, you brought her here. So I think Jecki's death will lie heavily on Sol's conscience going forwards now. The Qimir has May held hostage, pointing his saber at her head. Sol asks him what he is, and Qimir replies by saying he doesn't have a name, but the Jedi might call him a Sith. Now, I think Qimir is actually a Sith, but it's worth noting he hasn't actually called himself one. He just said that's what the Jedi would likely call him, whereas Palpatine called himself a Sith, and even his master Plagueis one as well. So whilst Qimir's holding May hostage, an enraged Sol goes in for the attack, and at this point Qimir's back's pretty much turned. He's not paying too much attention. So Qimir reminds him that this isn't the Jedi way. Sol then asks him why would he risk discovery, and we get a similar perspective to the witches on Brendok of the state of the galaxy under the Jedi, with Qimir saying he wants freedom. He wants to be able to wield his power as he likes without answering to the Jedi Order, and he wanted a pupil to pass these teachings on to, an acolyte. But she broke the rules, he's been exposed, and as he can't exist in the eyes of the Jedi, he'd have to kill everyone there that knows the truth. So at this moment, Osha and Yord do make it back to the others. Qimir quickly kills Yord by snapping his neck. So that's 2 big characters that have been ever present in the story so far, now dead in episode 5. Taking the opportunity to again, May tries to run into the forest. However, Osha stuns her, making sure to not miss this time around. But seeing Jecki die, and now Yord brings out a darker side to Sol, one that Osha's never seen before. But Qimir's always known it was in there. Sol attacks and almost kills Qimir, but Osha stops him. What he's doing isn't the way of the Jedi, and it isn't how Sol trained her to be. Qimir points out to Osha that this is who her master really is, telling Sol he's accepted his own darkness, but what's Sol done with his? So the moth creatures finally arrive after following the light. Osha manages to put Pip on Qimir's back with its light on, which draws them all to him, with them then carrying him off into the trees. Now you'd think he could have force pushed them all away like he did the Jedi, and probably follow up with a quick remark, but never mind, he'll be back. Now Osha's left with questions for Sol, like why can't she trust him, what did he do? Sol emotionally tells Osha he'll explain everything. So at this point there's no two ways about it. I think the Jedi likely did some bad stuff on Brendok, but it's also pretty obvious at this point too that Sol had a hand in it. But it's at this point where Osha begins to confront Sol on what he's been hiding. May appears in the distance and then stuns him. We get a reunion with the sisters, but Osha isn't really that into it. May thinks the Jedi have brainwashed her. Osha wants to arrest her for her crimes, but May pleads for Osha to pick her over the Jedi this time around. Now Osha attempts an arrest only for May to overpower her. He then picks up Yord's lightsaber and cuts off a part of her hair to look like her sister. What she's doing here is swapping places, swapping their clothes over too, so she can go with the Jedi as Osha, whilst the real Osha is left behind with Qimir. Now considering Qimir wanted to kill May most of this episode, she's pretty much left her sister here for dead. Now, I think May, seeing how powerful her master really was, who she now knows is Qimir, she wants to follow through on their deal by going undercover in the Jedi and wiping them out from within. If she believes her sister's been brainwashed by the Jedi, that gives her that motivation, that reason to take them down once again. Now, Basil's still around sniffing in the forest and spots Qimir walking past in the distance, so his survival will likely be confirmed to the others as well. Sol awakens to May pretending to be Osha, telling him that her sister's gone. I think Sol knows straight away this isn't his old Padawan Osha, but he's pretending not to for now. Whilst we see Qimir come across the real Osha disguised as May, still out cold, and he uses the Force to put a little bit of pressure on a wound she's got on her side there, causing her to roll over before he covers her with a blanket. Now Qimir knew pretty quickly before that it was Osha in his shop that time and not May, so I think he knows now as well. Interestingly, in this moment, we hear a version of Kylo Ren's theme tune play in the background, which also opens up the possibility of Qimir actually being the first Knight of Ren, rather than an actual Sith. Maybe he was trained by the Sith, but maybe he's not one now. Now remember, he said that's what the Jedi would call him. It's not actually what he was. Opening on what the episode only calls an unknown planet, Osha wakes up to find some of May's belongings. She makes her way outside to realise she's no longer on Kothar, but an island, with Qimir's ship that's brought them there the only visible way of escaping. Now, this is the island we saw in the trailers, and also at the end of episode 1 where we first met the mysterious Sith, with many fans speculating the island was actually Uktu, the island Luke isolated himself on in the sequels. Whilst it does look similar, if that was the case, the episode would likely have told us that, but they didn't, so they're likely hiding something here. Besides, this island seems to have its own native species, which look a little bit like mini elephants, which in my opinion are way better than Porgs, but the fact we don't see any Porgs is another sign that this isn't actually Luke's one-day home. Interestingly though, knowing that the showrunner is a big Star Wars Legends fan herself, and The Acolyte is a Sith-led story, and well, you probably already know my thoughts that Qimir is actually Darth Plagueis, well, this planet could actually be Baldemnik, which is described as an ocean planet with rocky islands located in the Outer Rim. It's the planet where in Legends Darth Plagueis killed his master Darth Tenebrous while they were both mining for, you guessed it, cortosis, the same metal that Qimir used for his helmet. Now we cut to Kothar where we see Sol and May leaving aboard the ship. He's trying to make contact with Coruscant to inform them of the Jedi casualties. His whole team he went there with is gone. This surprised me a little as I didn't think Sol would do that initially, but the guy could be in a state of shock, and we do see him take action to avoid the Jedi later on in the episode, but we'll talk about that a bit more when we get to it. Now, he wasn't able to send a clear transmission to Coruscant with signal issues, and whilst this is happening, May's elsewhere walking around the ship, where she remembers the last time she was on board when the twins were being tested by the Jedi 16 years prior back on Brendok. Now, Basil's still there sniffing around, as he was at the end of episode 5. He's aware it's May and not Osha, but he can't communicate as Yord was the only Jedi there that spoke his language. Not much really happens with Basil in this episode, apart from he puts Pip on his charging port and kicks May a few times, but I think they're keeping him around invisible for a reason. Now May, we'll talk about it here, performs a memory wipe on Pip and puts him back together with an older body unit found on Osha's desk. He's very much her droid now, which is seen with his lights now turning red rather than the blue before. Anyway, May hears Sol desperately trying to contact the Order and Master Venestra when she tries to sneak up on him from behind, knife in hand, ready to finish what she believes they started. Until Sol becomes aware of her presence and calls her by the name of Osha, asking her to fly the ship for him. If Sol's sensing someone's presence behind him, surely he knows even at this point that it's May and not his former Padawan. What Sol's doing here, I think, is similar to what Qimir is doing with Osha, which we're about to come on to. Psychology shows us that if you ask someone for a favour, they're more inclined to like you, so this could be Sol's way of trying to soften May's hatred towards him. Now, back on the unknown planet, Osha's following Qimir from afar, observing him, which is a nice way to put it, as Qimir takes off his tunic in preparation for his morning swim. Whilst doing this though, we notice a pretty large scar across his back, which tells us that although the Sith have been in hiding for a long time, they've still seen some action somewhere down the line, and I think a little more about this is revealed by Qimir in a moment, where we can start to put some puzzle pieces together on his backstory. Anyway, he strips down and goes for a swim. The whole time he knows Osha's watching, and he knows this is Osha and not May, by the way. However, he's not that worried. It's all part of his plan. Similar to Sol, he's showing Osha that he isn't the mysterious mask-wearing forest monster she would have initially perceived him as, but a normal guy carrying out his morning hygiene routine. Now, Osha picks up his lightsaber he left with his clothes on the ground, where he gives her some advice on her stance. He wanted Osha to pick up his saber, I feel. He knew she hadn't wielded one for a long time, and now that she finally has again, it's a Sith one, and he's already began her training without her even knowing it. She asks him if he killed Sol, to which he replies he didn't. He admits to killing Jeki and Yord, however he puts across his point of view that he didn't kill them as people, but he killed them as Jedi, members of an order that threatens his very existence. He put across his opinion that he was effectively sticking up for himself. Now, back on the ship, Sol embraces May by giving her a hug and thanks her for saving them by steering the ship. However, he wasn't off doing anything extra clever himself. He was sitting at the ship's controls visibly upset. However, in this time, I think he was collecting himself, thinking about how best to deal with the situation at hand, aware that it's May on the ship with him and not Osha, the assassin that's already played a hand in the death of 3 of his colleagues. Now he tells May that he's ready to face the High Council and tell them everything, presumably regarding the truth of what really happened on Brendok. However, I don't think he actually intends to do this. I think it's all part of the plan he's devised. Meanwhile, on Coruscant, Venestra is dealing with politics, further showing us how deeply involved the Jedi were at this time. A senator named Ravencourt wants to hold an external review of the Jedi Order, which just shows how the Jedi are an extension to the Republic, rather than being their own separate entity serving the people of the Republic. Now, Ravencourt's an interesting name for a senator. It might be a bit of a reach, but it might not be too. We know the Sith had allies within the Republic, which helped them eventually come to power and create the Empire. We learn here that Ravencourt's no friend of the Jedi's, so perhaps they're one of them. Interestingly, Ravens are also associated with witchcraft, darkness, and death, so perhaps Ravencourt will be revealed to be either Mother Anastasia or Mother Corral. Anyway, Venestra receives a report that Sol has attempted to make contact, but the message wasn't clear due to the bad signal. However, it sounded like he said his entire team had fallen, to which Venestra orders a rescue team to be sent to Kofar, with her going along too. Now, Qimir admits to May that he used to be a Jedi a long time ago. We don't know how long ago that was or how old Qimir even is. However, it does kind of play into what Qimir said to Sol when they faced off in the forest when he said, "You don't remember me," to which Sol replied, "I sense something familiar." Now, on the surface, I thought he was alluding to the apothecary where the Jedi confronted Qimir over supplying May with the poison to kill Master Torbin. But there's now the possibility that Qimir was once part of the Jedi Order and actually knew Sol. Perhaps he was a Padawan while Sol was a knight or something, and Sol did tell Osha back on Brendok there are a lot of children within the Order, so it's not unusual for him to not remember them all. But on top of this, Qimir mentions that he was thrown away by the Jedi. I think likely due to his dark tendencies, so he decided to stop with his training. But the scars on his back do look like whip marks, so perhaps Venestra Rao was his master and they had some kind of confrontation in the past. Now, Qimir is telling May a little bit more about how the Force works. We've heard it multiple times from the Jedi before, but here's the Sith's version. And it turns out that strength in the Force never really fades. Even without using it, it's all just a lie told by the Jedi, and that someone should really teach her about it. He's describing the powerful emotions that provide another way to access the Force, which is effectively what the Jedi say is the path to the dark side. And when Osha says this, he replies by calling it semantics, effectively nothing more than a surface level argument. Osha, not totally convinced by the dark side just yet, refuses Qimir's food and tells him she isn't easily corrupted. She pins the reason for her failure to become a Jedi on herself, rather than the Jedi turning their back on her. She ignites his saber, however, she stops short of killing him. Of course, it's not the Jedi way to strike the unarmed, but I really do think at this point, Osha's just trying to resist her own darkness here, which is coming to the surface more and more, and that'll only intensify spending more time with Qimir. Anyway, May pushes for Sol to tell her what really happened back on Brendok. She's realising here too that even Osha likely doesn't know the truth. It's not so much that she did and the Jedi brainwashed it out of her, but they lied to her from the outset, so she spent her entirety of her adult life living a lie. However, just at the moment the ship's power comes back on after being off for a short while, May reset Pip and tasked him with running a power check on the system. As it does, May rushes to make a transmission, however she's stunned from behind by Master Sol. He doesn't want her communicating outside of the ship, let alone with the Jedi. This is why I think he never had the intention to tell the High Council the truth, and this is the very reason why I think he'll also refrain from telling the Council about Qimir and the Sith if he makes it out of the season alive, because it would also run the risk of him being exposed as well. Now, a transmission comes in from the rescue team that are en route, asking Sol to keep his transponder on. However, he immediately shuts it off and jumps into hyperspace. He doesn't want to be found at the moment. We actually see the rescue team arrive within seconds of Sol's departure, where they descend down to the planet and head into the forest. They hear from the locals of the moth activity that took place there the night before, and that could possibly be the reason behind the mass loss of life the Jedi have suffered. However, Venestra's not sold on the theory herself, sensing something more sinister at play. You're kind of led down a path here of perhaps she thinks Sol's trying to cover something up about what happened 16 years ago on Brendok. and he's taken any steps necessary to do so. And whilst I think this will be the official story to come out at the end of the show, I think there's more in Vanesta's past here to discover, and I wouldn't be surprised at all to learn if it involves Qimir, with her suspicions pointing to him in the back of her mind. The Jedi coming across their slain colleagues in the forest will do nothing to ease that suspicion either, with one of the Jedi questioning whether Sol for some reason committed these crimes himself, as the Jedi were mostly slain by lightsaber apart from poor old Yord. The other Jedi also senses that it was one against many, and that whoever it was extremely powerful and made sure to not leave any survivors. However, when told Sol was a bold accusation, she mentions it could be something else, something to tip the scales of light and dark. I'm not sure about you guys here, but I think they could be pointing to the fact that Vanesta was possibly aware of Qimir's existence already, with him long ago actually being a Padawan who was likely kicked out by the Order for his darkness, where he was then found by the Sith. Now back on the ship, May wakes up restrained, and immediately you can see here the different approach each master is taking with the opposite pupil. Sol tells her he doesn't plan on hurting her, that he will let her go, as they need to work together to find her Sith master and rescue Osha. But first they need to talk, and he knows what to say. He's been thinking about it for 16 years after all. Now, the plot thickens as this indicates to me that he knew May was alive the entire time. Anyway, so down on the island we catch Qimir fixing his cortosis helmet, and he also mentions he wants the power of two, which is something the witches refer to often on Brendok. The power of one, the power of two, the power of many. So this pretty much confirms that the Witch Coven on Brendok were affiliated with the Sith in some way, and if you've checked out my other Acolyte videos recently, you already know what I think all of that is. Anyway, what this power of one, power of two stuff could actually be referring to could be the power of one master, the power of two Sith, effectively the rule of two, and the power of many witches. Qimir confirms his scar is from his former Jedi master, throwing him away, and then he tells her about his cortosis helmet, telling her it's not only handy against lightsabers, but it also acts as a sensory deprivation device, allowing the wearer to establish a deeper, undisturbed connection to the Force. And I have to say, the approach each master has taken here is night and day. Qimir's not keeping Osha there against her will. He said she could swim off the island if she wanted, and he's telling her a little bit about himself, his past, and his desires, whereas Sol on the other hand has literally restrained May and is effectively keeping her prisoner. The episode closes with Osha, off her own accord and through her own curiosity, putting on a cortosis helmet herself, showing us that she's becoming more and more comfortable with her surroundings and Qimir, and what is telling her, unlike Palpatine who seduced Anakin and kind of guided him to the dark side, Qimir's taking a different approach. He knows her darkness is there, but he's just allowing her to become comfortable with it herself.
What's aversions?
A concentration of Force energy centered around a location.
Aversions could create life, like what we see on this planet. It's a power that should be studied, protected.
This episode sees us return to Brendok 16 years prior to the show's main timeline, which acts as effectively the second, and possibly not the last flashback of the season. We catch up with a Jedi team taking samples and readings of the planet, and Padawan Torbin's pretty much had enough at this point. He doesn't see the greater importance of their mission to the Jedi. He's homesick and he's tired of eating something called Nuna Leg, which is a species of bird that we do know also inhabited the planet of Naboo. Really, he just wants to return to Coruscant, and this turns to be the whole driving force behind the Brendok tragedy. It's not the sole reason, but it's certainly a big player towards it. And it turns out the Jedi have been on Brendok for 7 weeks, yet to come across any signs of intelligent life. However, we learn 100 years ago the planet was deemed lifeless due to a hyperspace disaster that actually has been described before in the High Republic books. Now, the real reason the Jedi are there in the first place is because they're actually searching for a vergence in the Force, which is effectively a concentration of Force energy that's usually centered around a location, or in rare instances around a person, as seen with Anakin Skywalker. Now, a vergence in the Force has been known to create life, and given that the planet's now covered in forests, the Jedi are there to see if it's inhabited by sentient species too. Anyways, the Jedi decide to split up to cover more ground as Sol takes the speeder bike north. Not long afterwards though, he encounters the Bunta tree, and this is where the lines of this episode and episode 3 begin to blur, where we see the beginning of the third episode play out again with Osha and May's argument. However, this time it's from the perspective of Sol, and the whole episode is from the perspective of Sol, or the Jedi. Now, this is where Sol's curiosity peaks. Not only has he found life on a planet believed to be uninhabited, but it turns out to be 2 children, both of which are capable of wielding the Force with some degree of training. So he follows him back to the fortress, which must be well hidden as the Jedi have been searching for 7 weeks prior to this and haven't found it. Now he climbs the wall where he sees firsthand Mother Anastasia training the kids, as we saw in episode 3. Now Sol's perspective lacks a lot of context. We know Mother Anastasia wasn't actually all that bad. Yeah, she was tough on the girls in training, but it came from the right place. She wanted to prepare them for the dangers they may face in life. Whereas what Sol sees here is the Witch Mother angry and directing it towards them. The training session was ended abruptly because a noise was heard outside. It turns out this was Sol all along, and the girls are then sent to their room. Now as Sol leaves and returns to the Jedi camp to further elaborate on his findings and the danger he believes the twins are in, being a part of a coven, he tells the others he believes they're witches, and Torbin asks if they're Night Sisters. To which Indara replies that Night Sisters don't raise younglings, let alone train them. So in case you didn't know until now, this coven of witches are separate from the ones we've seen in Star Wars before. However, they certainly have their similarities, like the fact they both refer to the Force as the thread. So we can't rule out that both sects of witches originated from the same group a long time ago. Anyway, Indara thinks they should ask the council on what steps they should take, whereas Sol really doesn't think they have enough time for a back and forth chit chat with Coruscant. He believes the girls are in immediate danger, and you know what, there's a possibility he's actually right, which we'll get onto in a moment. Anyway, Sol asks Indara to come along with him back to the coven so she can witness what he has seen herself. The group travel back to the fortress, where it's revealed to be an old mining site, which we've known for a little while now due to it being in the official Star Wars databank on the website. But I speculate here that although we don't see any indication of the Sith being present in this episode, it doesn't mean that they aren't. It's just that we haven't seen them yet, and perhaps that'll be revealed in episode 8. However, the Sith at this time are known to have a strong interest in cortosis, as seen with Qimir's helmet. And with the dark side abilities being displayed by the Coven here being something we know that the Sith try and attempt in the future, I wouldn't be surprised to learn that perhaps this is an old cortosis mine offered to the Coven as a sanctuary as they were forced into exile in return for the Sith learning some of their dark secrets of the Force. And now we're at the point where the Ascension ceremony is taking place. However, as I said, we're seeing it this time from the Jedi's perspective. We get the same back and forth between the two groups as we saw in episode 3, but we do get to see just how Mother Anastasia enters Torbin's mind this time. Before she possesses him, she seduces him, offering to give him what he wants, the path to escape this planet and finally return to Coruscant. And now it seems it's only after Torbin weakens and gives into his desires that she's able to fully take control of him, where we see his eyes go black. Anyway, the rest of this part plays out the same way episode 3 did, with the witches agreeing to bring the girls to the Jedi camp for testing. Anastasia releases Torbin's mind and the Jedi make their way. Now back on the ship, Sol reveals to Indara, after she said it was clever of him to suggest training the girls as it buys them a bit of time to gain guidance from the Order, that he actually feels a connection to Osha, that he wasn't doing it to buy time, he actually wants her to become his first Padawan. However, Indara brushes it off as the twins are too old to begin their Jedi training, and besides, the cover would never allow it. Now in this episode, we see May's testing as well as Osha's, which is something we didn't see the first time around. Indara asks her about her head symbol and why she has it. They then get onto the topic of the Ascension ceremony and how the twins need to undergo it to lead the Coven themselves. However, the twins aren't exactly sure on the finer details of it all, which certainly raises suspicions on what the Ascension ceremony is actually for. Indara questions how the twins will lead the Coven if they're still children, and Osha lets something slip that will certainly set off alarm bells in Sol's head, that everyone must be sacrificed to fulfill their destiny. Now just what this means is unclear, and perhaps it will be revealed in the season finale. However, if we think back to the Power of Two chant, it seems to make a little bit more sense now. I think the Power of One is what will be revealed in a moment, where the two girls are the same, almost one being split into two. The Power of Two would be directly referencing the twins, and then the Power of Many would be the power of the entire Coven. Now I think the entire Coven could be looking to sacrifice themselves in order to live on in the powerful twins, almost like a mass essence transfer, or the other way around, where the life force of the two girls will be harnessed to give the Coven eternal life, resulting in the sacrifice of the twins themselves. So going back to what we said earlier, Sol definitely has a reason to be concerned for their immediate safety. Anyway, Torbin takes the girls' blood samples for testing, whilst Indara makes initial contact with the council and awaits a response. In the meantime, the Jedi had to continue with their mission of collecting samples from the planet. Now pretty much straight away, the council comes back and tells the Jedi the twins won't be trained, and the Jedi to stay away from the Coven's affairs. Now the samples actually come back as showing that they have an exceptionally high M count themselves, and what's more, their symbionts are also identical. Now this is unusual because even the symbionts of identical twins aren't exactly the same. So it's almost like they've taken two samples from the same person effectively, and apparently only a Virgins in the Force, the reason the Jedi are on the planet in the first place, would be able to take one being and split it into two, indicating the midichlorians have indeed been manipulated to create them. Now, as mentioned before, this is still different to how Anakin himself was created. The Force created Anakin totally on its own without the interference of a third party. It did it in response to Plagueis' attempts to create life, but it wasn't actually a part of his experiment. Now, here in this reveal, Torbin's desperate to leave and return to Coruscant, and he sees the twins as his ticket home. They're living proof of a vergence in the Force on Brendok, the whole reason they've been there 7 weeks in the first place. The Torbin races towards the Coven, and this really is the result of Anaseia's plan backfiring. She prodded his desires to return home, clearly intensifying them, which in turn leads him to taking drastic measures to return home himself by taking the twins, and it's this that really kick-started the tragedy of Brendok that night. We catch up with Mother Kirill and May in another scene we didn't see in Osha's version of events. Here, Mother Kirill's telling May to become angry, effectively encouraging her to tap into her inner darkness to prevent the Jedi from taking Osha. Meanwhile, we see Mother Anasaia running it past the rest of the Coven that Osha wants to go with the Jedi, and that they should respect her wishes. However, the Coven aren't happy about it, telling Anasaia she's their leader now, not just the girl's mother. However, her mind's pretty much made up, which leads to the witches telling her that Osha's wishes will also sacrifice the future of the Coven. On top with what May said to the Jedi earlier about everyone's sacrifice to fulfill their destiny, it really does sound like the twins were going to be offered up in some capacity. Now, sensing Osha's being kept against their wishes, Sol and Torbin make their way inside to save them, likely believing a sacrifice is imminent, whilst the witches are instructed to arm themselves and prepare for battle. Now, Sol questions the mothers on how the children were created, where Mother Anasaia foretells what's to one day happen to the Jedi, where every single one of them in the galaxy will be destroyed, which is effectively what happens in the main Star Wars timeline with Order 66. Meanwhile, we see a fire up the top of the fortress by burning Osha's notepad. Although she wanted to destroy the Jedi symbol she scratched within it, she never intended for it to spread like it did, with the fire spreading through the electrics inside the wall. So May runs down to seek help from her mother. Now, it's at this moment that tensions begin, the two groups increase even more, and now this part's a matter of interpretation, but from what I've seen here, I think Anasaia tries to make herself and May vanish into black smoke to remove them both from the inevitable conflict. However, when she does so, Sol misreads it as Anasaia trying to harm the girl, who by the way Sol mistook for Osha here himself, and plunges a lightsaber into her black smoky apparition, which then kills her. And this is all observed by Mother Kirill, who's now enraged, Torbin and the young May. So of course it makes sense as to why she's no fan of the Jedi when she grows up. Now, Kirill and Sol fire out, whilst Torbin deflects the rest of the Coven's attacks, until Mother Kirill herself disappears into black smoke right before a possessed Kelnucka emerges to attack Sol and Torbin. And let's just say I really enjoyed seeing a Wookiee Jedi swing his saber around in live action. That was pretty cool. Anyway, Kelnucka's kicking 10 tons out of him until Indara shows up to the rescue and through the Force fights against the rest of the Coven herself, who have control of his mind, eventually overcoming him, resulting in Kelnucka being freed and the witches, well, maybe dead, or rather passed out, through pushing themselves too much in the Force trying to battle against Indara. Either way, they likely burned in the fire dead or alive. So Sol goes to try and rescue the twins from the rapidly spreading flames. Where we see the moment with both girls facing one another on the bridge, we learn that the bridge actually gives way a time before May falls, and Sol's holding both sides up using the Force, but he can't hold it for long. He had to make a choice on which side to save, otherwise they'd both go down, and in the end he chose Osha, the twin he felt a stronger connection to. Now back on the ship, Sol intends to face the Council and tell them the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth, which they'd face severe consequences for. After all, the Jedi told them not to interfere. Now Indara also believes they should tell the truth, but in the way of Obi-Wan from a certain point of view. Maybe she's like a relation of his of some sort. Now she questions why Sol would throw himself to the mercy of the Council, and reminds him of why he wanted to save Osha in the first place, and now that she's lost everything, would he take her dream of becoming a Jedi away as well? So the official story of Brendok will be that May started the fire, they managed to save Osha, but there were no other survivors.
Osha?
So the episode picks up right where we left off in episode 6 with May wearing Qimir's Cortosis helmet. Now Qimir comes back into the room and it's like all of May's powers instantly returned, and then some. We know she was slowly starting to rediscover her abilities whilst on Kofar with the Jedi. However, it seems since Qimir revealed to her a different way to access the Force, coupled with the fact she's literally wearing a sensory deprivation device on her head, it's kind of opened the floodgate and they've come rushing back. Osha begins to choke as we learn she's witnessing a vision of the future. Now Qimir, becoming concerned, tries to reach out to her and calm her down. However, it's here Osha actually gets into Qimir's head, albeit accidentally I think, but it's just like her mother did to Torbin all them years ago. Qimir's eyes go black before Osha snaps out of it. Now interestingly, she tells Qimir she's seen May killing Soul on Brendok, with one hand outstretched and a saber in the other. However, she wasn't using it. Qimir tells Osha it's the future she saw, and that May can kill without a weapon, something Qimir only recently came to terms with that she wasn't capable of doing. However, as it turns out, Qimir was right, and this was a glimpse into the future. However, it wasn't May that Osha was seeing, it was herself. Anyway, they agreed to travel together to see who can get through to May first. Now on Brendok, Soul's ship is orbiting the atmosphere. He's brought May there as he intends to signal the Jedi for them to arrive, so he can finally prove there's a vergence on the planet. It's here where Soul begins to tell May his version of the Brendok tragedy, as she's sneakily trying to free herself from her restraints using the pip droid. Soul tells May his biggest regret is not being able to save them both, but he also reveals to her what we learned in episode 7, that they aren't twins or even sisters. But as soon as he's about to mention their unnatural creation and that they share the same consciousness, Osha uses Pip to stun him and makes a dash for the escape craft, where she actually puts on a helmet that bears a familiar Firebird symbol. Now, this symbol was originally for the Jedi Order, but it would later become, after a few alterations, the official symbol of the Rebel Alliance. Anyway, as Soul pursues her through the asteroid field, he goes to shoot, but Basil, for some strange reason, decides to sabotage the ship's wiring, which stops him as May crash lands onto the planet. Obviously, Basil sensed, in some capacity, Soul's actions could have led to May's death and wanted to stop him doing it. Just how he knows that is a mystery, but I have a thought. In Rogue One, we learn that the Force moves darkly around a creature that's about to kill. Now, although it's yet to be established in canon or even legends, perhaps Tinan's Basil's species have some kind of connection to the Force, which would actually make them far more efficient trackers if they're able to not just track a scent, but also someone's presence in the Force as well. Anyway, we cut to Coruscant, where we see Senator Rayancourt, played by David Harwood, who was mentioned a few episodes back, questioning the ongoing Jedi murder investigation that's taking place, which up until now the Jedi haven't informed the Senate about. Rayancourt's opinion of the Jedi is that they're a massive system of unchecked power, posing as a religion. He's worried that one day a powerful Jedi will fall and no one will be able to stop them, which to me seems to be foreshadowing the fall of Anakin Skywalker and the rise of Darth Vader and the Empire. Venestra doesn't do much to ease his concerns, and Rayancourt ends up reporting Venestra to Senator Drellick, who's actually of the Tarsant species. Interestingly, a member of the same species served as a Chancellor during the New Republic era, which we saw in The Force Awakens. Now anyway, back on Qimir's island, which I still think is Baldamnic by the way, and nothing in this episode has convinced me otherwise. In fact, an appearance in a moment nods towards this actually being the case. Now we see Qimir offering to train Osha, but she flat out rejects him. As she said before, she's not as easily corrupted as her sister, whereas May on the other hand took up Qimir on a deal without a second thought. We witness their ship depart from the mouth of a cave, and as the camera pans around, we see a creature lurking in the shadows. And as it moves into the light, it looks to be Palpatine's one-day master, Darth Plagueis. Finally getting his live-action canon reintroduction, they've clearly stuck to him being of the Mune species, which is cool, and it kind of makes sense. We were right in picking up on Plagueis clues throughout the season. However, rather than Qimir actually being the wise Sith Lord himself, it turns out he's someone with a very close connection to him. So who that makes Qimir is still up in the air. However, I've done some digging online, and as it turns out, Qimir was actually going to be Darth Tenebrous in the series, but it was cut out. So whether he still is or not, or perhaps he's Darth Tenebrous' other apprentice that Plagueis is keeping a very close eye on, or even an early apprentice to Plagueis himself before he came across Palpatine, is yet to be seen. But hopefully, if there is a season 2, it will be revealed there. Now, it's at this point that all parties begin to arrive on Brendok. Venestra's en route with a team of Jedi Knights, just enough to not raise an alarm to the rest of the Order or the Senate. They still want to keep this whole thing under wraps for now at least. Now on Brendok, we return to what's left of the Witch Fortress after the fire 16 years prior. Now, Soul's there searching for May, whilst we see Osha and Qimir arrive too. We're trying to gain access to the fortress, and Osha believes the only way in is to fix the lift. However, Qimir alludes to another. As she turns around, he's gone. Now, the most logical answer to how Qimir disappears and got inside that quickly is via a Force ability that's often associated with another big fan theory in regards to his true identity, that he's actually Darth Venomous, who was another apprentice Darth Tenebrous was training alongside Plagueis, effectively breaking the rule of two, but in secret. Venomous in Legends was able to use the Force to levitate himself. It could also explain why Plagueis was seemingly hiding within the cave. Perhaps Qimir didn't actually know he was there, and Qimir actually looking for his own apprentice to take down his master Tenebrous. Anyway, inside the fortress, Qimir's donning his Cortos' helmet, and he confronts and fights with Master Soul, who tells Qimir that he will destroy him if he must, whilst Qimir replies, "Not if she gets to you first." And at this point, he's alluding to May, referring back to the vision Osha had whilst wearing the helmet, a vision misunderstood. I have to say, I think the fight scenes in this episode just about come on top in my opinion over the ones we had in episode 5. Now Qimir is fighting with dual sabers, and we see Soul demonstrate some insane force abilities, which ends up disarming him with one of his sabers. Now May and Osha encounter one another in their old bedroom, the very place their paths diverged 16 years ago. As it turns out, May's the one to finally reveal the truth to Osha, that she didn't mean to cause this fire, that it wasn't her that killed the Coven, it was actually Soul. He killed their mother. She saw it with her own eyes, telling her that Soul was the reason she had those negative emotions that stopped her becoming a Jedi. Really, it was him that failed her rather than the other way around. Now, back on the ground, as the fight between Soul and Qimir rages on, the Jedi ship flies over and Soul tells Qimir that he's going to pay for what he's done. And Qimir's response to that is, "They aren't here for me." Soul destroys Qimir's other saber and he pretty much has him on the ropes. But it's at this moment that May appears and disarms him, tossing his saber to the ground. Now Qimir senses this is the moment Osha saw in her vision, and he encourages May to strike him down to complete her test and her journey to the dark side. Very similar to how Palpatine wanted Luke to kill Vader in Return of the Jedi. However, May refuses. Instead, she wants him to pay for his crimes, not take what could be seen as the easy way out by dying. I guess as Torbin did. She wants him to confess to the High Council, the Senate, the Republic, everyone. So Soul tries to reason with her, telling her he believes they're the same person, created with the use of the Force by their witch mother Anastasia, telling him he doesn't know how she did it, but likely with the use of her virgins on the planet. Now the camera at this point pans to Qimir, who looks up with interest. So perhaps this is an ability first used by the witches, which has now come to the attention of the Sith, and we know one day Plagueis goes on to attempt this himself, where the Force answered back, and instead created the prophesied chosen one with Anakin. Anyway, May gets Soul to confess to killing Mother Anastasia, and Osha hears it. Just as she's walking out into the courtyard, Soul tries to explain his thought process behind his actions, that the Jedi wouldn't have trained her otherwise as she was too old, that he kept it from her for her own good essentially, but at this point Osha can't see past the fact he's lied to her and kept that lie since day one. Osha's devastated as she's holding Soul's saber in one hand. She tells him to stop talking as she reaches out with her other. She makes Soul stop talking effectively as we see what is possibly the first time the Force choke ability has been used. Her face is almost expressionless, cold, but the saber tells a different story entirely. We can see the crystal begin to bleed red. In canon, a lightsaber becomes red through the act of a darksider bending it to their will, pouring their rage, fear and pain into it, causing it to, as the name suggests, bleed. And once done so, Osha's journey to the dark side is complete. Not only has she killed a Jedi without a weapon, which was May's mission that she failed, she's also managed to bleed a Kyber crystal, which was also another mission of the Sith. Qimir goes to her side, and in a moment of pure emotion, she ignites the saber and swings it in his direction, revealing a blue blade slowly being consumed by red, in what I think is one of the most coolest lightsaber moments there is, and now it really makes me want to buy a saber that does that. Anyway, the Jedi are there. Venestra senses Kymir's presence, and he senses hers and puts on his helmet and splits, confirming to us that he was once her apprentice, with her likely being responsible after all for the scar on his back. Now, May tells Osha they need to leave, and soon after, Venestra finds Soul's lifeless body, and she picks up on Force echoes of what transpired there the night of the tragedy, allowing her to piece the clues together. Now, the girl's way out of the fortress without coming into contact with a Jedi is the same way May survived the fall the night of the fire, through a tunnel. It seems like a young May was sucked inside, preventing her from falling to her death, in a similar way to how Luke was sucked inside of a tunnel on Cloud City just after he lost his hand to Vader in The Empire Strikes Back. As the Jedi search the compound, Venestra stays with Soul as Qimir watches his former master from the shadows. I think this will likely be a story we continue in Season 2 if it happens, what really went down between Venestra and Qimir. Now Qimir leaves and catches up with the girls at the Bunta Tree, where Osha agrees to go with Qimir if he lets May go. After all, he wouldn't really want the Jedi running around after her with her knowledge of the Sith, so Qimir wipes her memory, removing any trace of her sister Osha and her former master permanently. No matter what the Jedi do, May won't be able to tell them a thing. Anyways, the Jedi arrive and she's under arrest. They take her back to Coruscant, where she meets with Venestra there, who's well aware of who she is, although she's aware she has no recollection of the last 16 years. Not even that she has a sister, but Venestra is going to work with her to find her former apprentice who's turned dark. Her involvement in this story isn't over yet. The official story to the rest of the Order and the Senate is one of a lone Jedi who messed up on Brendok and then attempted to cover his own tracks, which resulted in the death of his entire team on Kothar, which of course led to Master Soul not being able to live with the guilt any longer, leading to him committing suicide at the location his initial fall took place. Anyway, back on Qimir's island, we see the two looking out to the horizon together as Qimir moves to touch her hand. This to me is kind of a mix of Luke's sunset scene in A New Hope and Anakin's marriage to Padme at the end of Attack of the Clones, both intended to symbolise a new beginning, the next chapter of their story. Now the episode ends with something not many fans were expecting, Venestra off to speak to Master Yoda, likely to seek his guidance and counsel, telling him a version of the events, but like before, from a certain point of view. This episode for me was the best of the season. A big theme of the show overall was that actions have consequences, as seen with pretty much all of the characters, but none as much as Master Soul. We finally had our live action canon debut of Darth Plagueis, something fans have wanted to see ever since the announcement of The Force Awakens, and we're still left with plenty of questions for season 2, like if Qimir isn't Plagueis, then who is he? Tenebrous, venomous, or someone new? And is Basil Force sensitive? Sure, the show has had its issues. I wasn't a fan of how they used episodes 3 and 7. I feel what we learnt there could have been condensed down into a shorter flashbacks that occurred during episodes in the main timeline, but overall I enjoyed it, and with the introduction of Plagueis, this story feels way too important to not be renewed for a second season. But I want to know your thoughts on the show, and who do you think Qimir is now? As always, drop your thoughts, theories and wilder speculations down in the comments below. Remember to leave a like on the video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to the channel if you'd like to catch more of our Star Wars videos. Catch you in the next one. May the Force be with you.